Veronica told you that I'm a nerd about journey mapping, and here comes the mega nerdness. I made a journey map of journey mapping. So welcome to my meta map of mapping. Journey mappers go through 4 phases as they create a journey map. And each of these phases has common pain points. And those pain points lead to the principles I'm going to share with you today on how to boost the impact of your mapping. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining me today. And thank you to the UX Pressure team, both Veronica and Yulia. If y'all are not aware, this is a distributed team, and it's almost midnight for Yulia. So we got people here from all over the world. Nick Bomas is here from New Zealand. I think it's like 4 a.m. for him. So thank you for being here. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to share with you some principles and best practices for journey mapping. And these are insights that I've gathered from interviews that I've done with people with all different types of engagement with journey mapping. And I met UX Pressure. It's been a while. I've been to several other webinars. I find them really helpful. So it's a real honor to be here today sharing with you. So thanks to the UX Pressure team. Okay, so as Veronica gave you an introduction, I'm Julie Francis. I'm a qualitative researcher. I specialize in journey mapping for both user experience and customer experience. And in my career, I've spent most of it as an independent research consultant, but I've also worked in-house, most recently at Meta. And in my 5 years in-house at Meta, I focused on virtual reality. And there I taught hundreds of people, mostly researchers, about journey mapping. And once, just for kicks, because I was working in the virtual reality space, I actually taught my workshop in virtual reality. And you want to talk about being a nerd about journey mapping. That was epic nerdness, because I was there as an avatar, teaching. And all my students were there as little avatars. And we were gathered around these virtual life-size journey maps with the journey mappers who were also there as their avatars. And it was incredibly fun. I would love to say I'm going to teach it again that way sometime soon, but who knows, maybe we'll make that happen. So I mentioned I spent most of my career with my own research consultancy, Bellavia Research. And what I do there is I'm mostly focused on journey mapping. And I'm either creating journey maps for clients or often with clients, because I like to teach people as we go along, so maybe they don't need me anymore. And I'm also spend a lot of my time teaching other people how to create journey maps. I'm a total nerd about journey mapping. So today I'll be sharing with you best practices for journey mapping, including 5 key principles for maps with impact. And if you're wondering, okay, well, where'd you come up with those? Well, they come from my own experience, but also from the experiences of others. So in the last 10 years, I've partnered with a bunch of people, but I've also interviewed a whole bunch of people about journey mapping. And I just love learning from other people's experiences. So who are those people? I talk to researchers. I talk to map designers, illustrators, product managers, stakeholders, senior leaders, anybody that has any kind of involvement in making or using or benefiting from a journey map. And in those interviews, I asked them to share their experiences with me. So what have been some of their successes, and why do they think those maps were successful? What have been some of their failures? Why do they think those fell short? What are their lessons learned? What advice would they give to other people? And if you look across all of those like 75 hours of just interviews, never mind the consulting work that I've done, there's a common pain point that emerges. So the biggest pain point that I've come across and hear from others in terms of journey mapping is you put all this time and money into creating a map, and then it falls short of its potential. And you're like, damn it. So despite really solid thinking, a lot of effort, maybe a beautiful illustration, the map isn't used, or little or nothing changes. And that's not why we're creating journey maps, right? We're here because we believe that journey mapping is an approach that's going to yield impact for the company. So my research has revealed common reasons this happens and what to do to prevent it. And that's what we're going to go through today, is those principles and the best practices for making sure that your maps have maximum impact. So here's what we're going to cover. I'm going to give you a quick overview of those 5 principles, but we're going to spend most of our time on 2 of the best practices related to journey maps with impact. One is about data, so how to use and conduct research to support your journey mapping efforts. And then the second thing is activating the map. So once you have the map, how do you use it to help make sure that it's accepted and used? I know that we've got some diversity in the people who are here today. So some of you are vendors, some of you are designers, illustrators, you work in-house in CX and UX. And I just want to acknowledge that and say that I do believe that these principles that I'm sharing today are relevant to you, no matter kind of what your role is in this process. Okay, first, some level setting. So chances are you wouldn't be here if you're not familiar with journey mapping, but even people that are experienced with journey mapping, I'm sometimes surprised that we're not aligned when we're using language, like we're not necessarily speaking the same language. So I just want to get real basic and start with some level setting. I promise I'm not going to stay in basic territory, but we're going to go through this very quickly. So what is a journey map? Well, I like to ask ChatGPT. So here's what ChatGPT says. A journey map is a visual representation of a person's experience, person's key there, as they interact with a product, service, or process over time. It captures the various touch points, emotions, and actions involved, helping organizations understand and improve the overall journey. Just kind of surprised. I actually kind of like that definition. For once, I was pleased with ChatGPT's results. And let's delve more into that time piece. So all journey maps include a time element. It is the time element that separates a journey map from a cute little infographic. So the time element in a journey map is represented on the x-axis, horizontal, as the steps that are unfolding over time. And there can be lots of small steps, so they're usually grouped into phases or stages. If your map has a grid-like appearance, you can think of these times or phases as the columns. And that time frame varies dramatically map to map. So a map can show an experience that unfolds over minutes or days or weeks or months or even years. And why is that? It's because just like a geographic map, a journey map has journey maps can have different levels of zoom based on what they're conveying. So there are macro maps, which are zoomed out super high level. And then there are micro journeys, which are very focused, very zoomed in. We also refer to macro journeys as relationship journeys, and they're high level views of an end-to-end experience. So for example, the entire customer lifecycle from initial awareness through post-purchase, my relationship with your brand, your company, your service. Macro journeys are often relevant to the entire org, all the way up to the highest levels of leadership. They often inform strategy, roadmap prioritization, investment, innovation, hiring, and they tend to have much longer time frames. For example, these could be experiences that take place over months, if not years. Very different than a micro journey. So a micro journey is a much more focused view. People sometimes describe these as tactical journeys. For example, a person using a specific feature. A micro journey tends to be a much shorter time frame, could be minutes, could be days, could be weeks. And multiple micro journeys ladder up to a parent touch point in the macro journey. And I saw somebody reference this when they were describing what they see as the biggest challenge with journey mapping. You can end up with a huge number of maps. If you're in an org with a sophisticated journey mapping practice, you're going to end up with a whole bunch of micro journeys, maybe more than one macro journey, but they're all laddering up. And when those maps are different approaches, different styles, they can become really, really challenging to manage. So operationalization, and I'm so proud when I make that word come out of my mouth properly. Operationalization is one thing that becomes a challenge when your organization develops some journey mapping chops. So this is part of the brilliance of a solution like UX Pressure. In an org that has a lot of journey maps, UX Pressure makes it much easier to organize all those micro journeys and show how they ladder up to macro journeys. And that, again, that is something you see more in companies with more sophisticated journey mapping practices. Okay, we talked about time, but a journey map is not just a timeline. There's a whole lot of other information on a map on the y-axis. So these are the swim lanes or the rows, and they are highly, highly variable. And we're going to talk about the importance of customizing your journey maps. So these swim lanes vary based on your map objectives, your audience, the insights you're trying to convey, and some very common swim lanes include what the user is thinking, feeling, doing. I hear people say that that's what a journey map is. Not all journey maps include those elements. So again, you get to customize it according to your objectives and your audience. But it's very common to see what the user's thinking, feeling, doing in a journey map. Pain points, what's not working, what you've learned from research. And then very importantly, the biggest opportunities to improve the experience, because a journey map is about the impact that we're having. So those are some common elements of a map, but then there's different flavors of maps. There's current state maps, future state maps. So a current state summarizes the existing landscape, opportunities to improve things. Future state is like a North Star, what you're hoping to build. Current state maps generally precede future state maps. It's a little problematic when a company jumps past understanding the current landscape and goes straight to future state, but you see it done. So generally, when you understand the current state, that sets you up to then figure out what's the best experience we can build, and that's where you create a future state map. And then there's another flavor, which is a service design map. And a service design map is just a map with way more detail about internal processes. Okay, now that we have level set on what a journey map is, back to our definitions. Here's another one from one of my former colleagues at Meta, who's now one of my clients at Google. Her name is Catherine Lovazano, and I love her definition of a journey map. She says, a journey map is a way of organizing insights for the purpose of shared understanding and action. And I love it that she's focusing on the why and not just on the what. So if your map is helping you get to shared understanding and action, chances are very good you're going to have some impact in the company. All right, so let's dive into the fun part. Veronica told you that I'm a nerd about journey mapping, and here comes the mega nerdness. I made a journey map of journey mapping. So welcome to my meta map of mapping. Journey mappers go through 4 phases as they create a journey map. And each of these phases has common pain points. And those pain points lead to the principles I'm going to share with you today on how to boost the impact of your mapping. So in the initiation phase, the first phase, you launch a journey mapping project. And the biggest pain point here, you see later on, actually. You realize in retrospect that there was a lack of clear objectives and there was a lack of buy-in. And that leads to my first principle. A map with impact is focused. During your initial planning, you need clarity and alignment on what you're mapping and why. In the investigation phase, you're conducting research and reviewing existing data. And the biggest pain point here is you don't have time or you don't have budget to conduct journey-focused research. And maybe also you don't have existing research that you can draw on, or it's really incomplete insights. And that leads to principle number 2, which is that a map with impact needs to be data-based or research-based. In the third step, the illustration phase, you're wrangling everything into a visual journey map. Biggest pain point here, oh my God, it's actually really challenging to do this. Maps end up really detailed. Why? Because you're trying to boil the ocean. You're trying to do all things for all audience and shove everything that you learned into one deliverable. And that leads to principle number 3, which is that the journey map needs to be customized, tailored to your audience, and tailored to the objective. And you actually may end up with more than one version. Because if you try to do all things for all people in one map, again, it can be incredibly overwhelming. And it's you'll hear me say later on, that's another beauty of something like UX Pressure, because UX Pressure allows you to hide swim lanes. So depending on who you're sharing the map with, you can say, they don't need to see all this detail. We're going to hide all this and show them just what they need. Okay, then the fourth phase is the launch phase, where you're sharing the map. The biggest pain point here is that maps are launched with great fanfare because you've been working on this maybe for months and you and the team are excited, and then they land with a thud. They start gathering dust. Maybe they're not used much. Maybe there's not the impact you were hoping for, and that sucks. So this leads to principle number 4. A map with impact is integrated, meaning that it is accepted by the org. It is acted upon because it's been integrated into the way that teams work. And then there's a 5th underlying principle that runs through all of this, which is collaboration. If you leave here with only one word in your brain, I hope that word is going to be collaboration, because it is the one thing more than anything else that differentiates maps that have impact with maps that fall short and gather dust. Maps that are created in isolation by someone like me, a vendor coming in to help you with journey maps, working with my illustrator, if we do that in isolation, it's far more likely to fall flat and gather dust. So if you're a vendor, or if you're hiring vendors to help you with your mapping, I encourage you to think about how you can make this as collaborative as possible. So for maximum impact, journey mapping needs to be collaborative from the beginning, all the way through research, through the creation of the artifact, and finally through how you launch it with the people who you hope are going to use it. Let me introduce you to the very fun world of Cake Rex. Jeff Patton says, shared documents are not shared understanding. And I love that he introduces this idea of Cake Rex and what this has to do with, with how we work. And thank you to Cake Rex for permission to use these images. So on the left, you have a pretty cake with pink roses, and this is someone's 35th birthday. My not 35th birthday is tomorrow. The purple words here read, can you draw a unicorn? Well, that's really cute. That's kind of fun, but it would have been more fun to see that unicorn in buttercream. Then on the right, you have just balloons, highly descriptive label. Yes, indeed, those are just balloons. So what does a cake wreck have to do with a journey map? Well, the person in the bakery with that frosting in their hand obviously didn't get the message, right? Total communication breakdown. And by the way, if you go to cakerex.com, there are some really hilarious examples of cakes gone very wrong. And I think they're real. I mean, maybe there's the occasional one that's made up, but I think some of them are actually real. Okay, so communication breakdown. Likely, the meaning and the intention would have been totally obvious through a conversation. Like, duh, right? It doesn't seem that hard to recognize somebody didn't want these words, they wanted the images. But if you take a step back and think about what this has to do with how we work, well, if a document with words was good enough, we wouldn't have ended up with cakes like this in the world. If documents with words were good enough, we would all just go read books and be great at what we do. Or we wouldn't have to go to so damn many meetings, right? Documents with words are not enough. So much of what we accomplish through our conversation and collaboration. So a journey map can be an incredibly gorgeous visual with lots of words. And I have delivered incredibly gorgeous journey maps. But that doesn't mean your map is going to convey what you want it to, or that the viewer understands what the heck to do with it. So a map is not going to have as much impact on its own as it will when the people that you want to benefit from that map are involved in the creation of it from the very beginning, start to finish. As Jim Callback says, and I actually think Jim Callback might be here today as well, he says, focus on the verb, not the noun. The map doesn't provide the answers. It's a platform for conversation. So it's less about the map, less about the artifact, the final deliverable, that thing that is the final output of this actually doesn't matter as much as the process. So take the pressure off yourself to make something gorgeous. It doesn't need to be museum quality to have impact. And if you don't know Jim Callback, he is a former presenter for UX Prussia. And I suggest that you check out his session. It was great. And he's also the author of this book, Mapping Experiences. Make sure if you buy this book, you get the most recent edition. Highly recommend this book. Okay, so to make maps with more impact, we need to focus less on the map as the final destination and the deliverable, and we need to focus more on the process of mapping. The superpower of journey mapping is the journey map's ability to align people on a shared understanding of the biggest opportunities to improve the experience. And the best way to build that alignment is through collaboratively creating and then using a map. You really cannot expect people to understand or independently use a poster that you throw their direction or hang on their wall. All right, so now we're going to start going through the 5 principles. So let's take a peek at the first one. The first principle is that a journey map with impact needs to be focused. I'm going to go through this very quickly. I use a very simple planning brief. It's like, sometimes these best practices are like, oh my God, why didn't I think of that? So like, once I started with this approach, I was like, wow, this is so simple and it's so helpful. So this silly little step in my process, this brief, helps me and my team or me and my client get really clear, very intentional and aligned as we nail down 6 components. And what we do is we nail down, what are we mapping? Why are we mapping this? What's the objective here? Who's the intended audience of this? Who's the actor in the map? Which persona, which segment, personas, segments? That was another challenge I heard somebody mention in the chat. What's the time frame of the map? And then with whom? And with whom is a really important thing here. And there's a lot more to say about that. That's who are the collaborators that you're going to bring in. And you want to be thinking about collaborators, contributors, champions. And I say lots more about that in my course. But also I have a LinkedIn article you can check out that gives way more information about this planning piece. Big surprise here. It's best to get focused collaboratively. So you want to work with other people as you align on what you're mapping for whom, why, etc. As you're building that alignment, you're also building buy-in and interest in what you're doing. And that can be incredibly helpful, especially from your internal champions. Okay, jumping on to principle number 2, the highest impact maps are data-based. And given that I'm a researcher, UX Prussia, and I thought this would be something helpful for me to go into more in depth. I haven't seen a lot of depth on this in other webinars. So we're going to spend some time on this principle and the associated best practices. So what does it mean to be data-based? It means that your maps are rooted in a very solid understanding of your customers, your users, your buyers. If you've tried to create a journey map without these insights, you know how hard it is. It's incredibly difficult to create a journey map because as soon as you start putting pen to paper or pixel to tool, you're like, whoa, I don't know what people are trying to do. I don't really understand the common flows that people go through. And if you're creating a journey map without these insights, you're creating what we call an assumptive map, which is based on recycled internal assumptions and guesses. And that can actually be kind of dangerous territory to be in. I see it happen and it makes me cringe. And maybe that's my bias because I'm a UX researcher, but I really believe in the power of conducting research specifically for the creation of journey maps. And it's not just my bias. When I talk to other people about what makes for a good journey map, this is a very common best practice that I hear. So there are many sources of data that you can use. Ideally, you conduct qualitative research, quantitative research, specifically for the purpose of understanding people's journeys. And I'm going to describe for you how I do that. But then you can also turn to existing research that you have. So do you have survey data? Do you have qual research reports that provide some hints into people's journeys? Can you buy secondary market research? You might also turn to data analytics. Do they have behavioral or logged data that you can use? You might turn to customer support metrics, voice of the customer data, sales data, et cetera. I encourage you to think about who your audience is and what kind of data they're going to resonate with. Make sure you're reflecting that in your map. I'll say more about that in a minute. But in terms of figuring out what the most common pain points are, there are a lot of journeys, a lot of data sources you can use in terms of understanding the steps in the process. That's where I personally believe qualitative and quantitative research are most important. Okay, so how do I do this? So when I interview people to understand their journeys, I usually do one-on-one interviews. I do not believe you can do a focus group to understand people's journeys. If you are trying to characterize a journey where there are multiple players, so for example, a couple different roles in a company, then it might make sense to talk to them simultaneously, but generally safe territories to interview people one at a time. I use a simple approach that I learned from a researcher who's now at Google. Her name is Beverly Freeman. And we just use this very simple worksheet. And in this very simple worksheet, the x-axis is the timeline. The y-axis is ranging from from positive to negative emotions. And those smileys are very deliberately super generic emotion cues. You don't want your high point to be like this crazy, like happy, and your low point to be like smoke coming out of its ears. You want them to be very generic because you want your participants to put their own emotion labels on what does it mean for something to be positive? What does it mean for it to be negative? So how do you use this in an interview? You just ask the research participant to tell you their story. So I tell people I'm trying to understand their experience over time, trying to understand what's working well, the high points, what's not working well, the low points, everything in between. And I actually model that for them because research participants are like, what are you talking about? So for example, I might say, let's pretend, and I'd come up with an example that has nothing to do with the space that I'm interviewing in. So I might say, let's imagine you were telling me a story of like buying a donut this morning. You might tell me when the idea came to you. Oh, I was watching a movie last night. There was a donut, whatever. You might tell me how you made the decision that you were going to actually do this and how you decided where to go and how you decided which one to order and blah, blah, blah. So I kind of model it for them with kind of a silly example. And then I encourage them to tell this story to me as it were a story they would tell a friend, albeit with way more detail than they think their friend would care about. So I kind of joke with them about how much detail I want them to give me. And what they end up doing is telling me, first I did this, okay, and then I guess I did that, and then. And as they're telling me their story, I'm jotting down those key steps, those key beats on stickies, and I place those stickies on the x-axis. Generally, I'm interviewing people in person, so I'm really using worksheets and stickies, but you can also do this using a whiteboarding tool like Mural or Miro. Okay, so once you have the steps, then you want to understand people's the high points of their experience and the low points in their experience. And I explained to my participants that this vertical line, the y-axis, ranges from neutral to positive and then from neutral to negative. And I asked them to just show me like, well, okay, you said that was one of the highlights. Well, how high was that relative to this other stuff? And I let them tell me, here's how high to put this. And that's really important because there can be more than one high point. You kind of want to understand the relative highness of the highs. Then I repeat that for the low points as well. Very important to let them use their own words to label the emotions. So you just have to ask them, and people can find that really kind of awkward. Not everybody's skilled in thinking about their emotions associated with donut purchasing. So sometimes I'll use this emotional wheel. I actually cut that out of the presentation. But if people are struggling to identify their emotions, you can say, tell me more about this feeling of being happy. And there's words on that wheel to help them articulate exactly what they mean by that. So why this approach? This is actually related to behavioral economics and Daniel Kahneman's peak end rule. What is that? Nielsen Norman defines the peak end rule as a cognitive bias that impacts how people remember past events. So intense positive or intense negative moments, both positives and negatives can be peaks. And the final moments of the experience, the end, peak end, are heavily weighted in our mental calculus. So when we think about a person's impression of an experience with our features or our product, or their overall experience with our brand or our service, It's not truly a sum of all of those experiences. They are heavily weighted by those peaks, whether they're positive or negative, and also how they're feeling at the end. Big surprise, our collaborating ducks are back. Of course, you want to use a collaborative approach to data collection and also to your analysis. So I invite people to observe the interviews. I try to get as many people as I can to my interviews. Even better, get those people not just observing, but taking notes, which makes them actively listening. So Jared Spool suggests you just give people this worksheet. You have them take notes right on the worksheet. And if they're not researchers, they may not be very good at note taking or understand, like, out of all this amazing stuff I'm hearing, what do I write down? So I try to train people to just focus on what were the high points and the emotions associated with that, the low points and the emotions associated with that, and of course, the end point as well. But you also want to include people in your analysis. So following the advice of Michael Morgan, he was my client many years ago at Walmart.com. Now he's at LinkedIn. He says, take stakeholders along with you on the analysis journey. Pull back the curtain and don't wait for the grand reveal. And that's really a temptation with journey mapping, especially if you've brought in a vendor who's created a beautiful illustration. There's this desire to be like, look what we commissioned. But actually, that's kind of a mistake. So what you want to do is you want to expose people to the raw data and insights as they fall into place. So one way to do that, an interview is raw data. So you bring them into the field with you, or you invite them to observe your interviews, but you can also invite them to participate in the debriefs. You can give them a peek into the analysis process. Do you have a war room? Can you give them a walkthrough of the mural where you're doing your analysis? And why does this work? People are far more likely to believe and remember research insights when they feel tangible. And the best way to make those insights feel tangible is to expose people to the raw data and for them to see, wow, they went through a rigorous process to arrive at these insights. They didn't just pull these out of a hat. All right, quant research. So far, we've only talked about qual, but how to use quant research to prioritize, or how to use quant research in journey mapping. It's pretty rare to use quantitative research to figure out what the steps in the journey are. I've actually seen it done. It's kind of an interesting approach, but what I like to do is use quantitative research to prioritize people's needs. So how do you do that? I use an approach that I have adapted from the jobs to be done world. If you're not familiar with jobs to be done, that's an entirely other webinar. Jim Callback actually has great books on jobs to be done as well. Jobs to be done is basically a fancy way of saying needs. And I cringe when I use the term jobs to be done. I'm totally allergic to this stupid language. I'm like, can we just not, please? Jobs to be done is basically somebody's big need, something they're trying to accomplish. So you start with a list of these jobs to be done and these needs. And once you have that list of attributes, what you want to do is field a survey where you measure two things. So the first thing you do is you survey your respondents on how important is, Mad Lib, fill in attribute. You might use like a 5-point Likert scale. And then you ask a different question with the exact same set of attributes. So how satisfied are you with how our company, blah, here's the attribute again. Then you have two options what you do with that. So the first thing you might do is you might calculate an opportunity score. And this is some simple math, but kind of fancy because you're creating an index. So you subtract the satisfaction from the importance. That helps you identify the gap. This is a thing that's very important to people, and whoa, are we falling short here? However, it's not just the gap that you care about, right? Because you really want to prioritize the things that are most important to people. So you add the importance onto that number. So you're creating an index. The other thing you can do, or you can do both of these things, is you map those onto a 2x2. So in the visual on the right, these are jobs to be done. And you can see that on the x-axis, we have mapped the importance of this job to be done. On the y-axis, we are mapping how important this is to people. And what that does is it gives you the stuff in the bottom right quadrant, which is the underserved areas. These are the things that are most important to your customers, where you're really falling down on the job. And I'm only talking about your company, but you could also do this with a competitive lens. So you can run through that question, how well are we doing on this, with your competitor set as well. All right, jumping on to the third principle, customization. The highest impact journey maps are customized based primarily on the objectives and the audience, but also on the insights that you gleaned, your company or your client's culture, the tools people like to work in. And I could say way more about customization, but that's not our focus today. So if you want to hear more, you can check out my Udemy course or join me for a workshop. I'm just going to say a few things about customization. So as Catherine Lovazano, again, UX research manager at Google says, it doesn't matter what it looks like. It matters what it does. You can have a simplistic looking journey map that does a good job. Again, you do not need to win a design prize, although it feels kind of good when you do. Because again, it's not the mapping, it's the map, it is the mapping, not the map, where the impact comes from. People put a lot of pressure on themselves to design something gorgeous and highly polished, and it may not be necessary, and let me prove it to you. This is one phase of a big journey. I created this map in a workshop with cross-functional partners at Meta. You may be shocked to hear I didn't hire a professional designer for this. And it was stunning how high impact this incredibly ugly journey map had. Our plan was to create this in a workshop and then go from here to something beautiful created by a designer. And the team and I decided it would be a waste of energy and money. And so we didn't do that, because just creating this map collaboratively had the impact that we needed. Why is that? So going back to Catherine Lovazano's definition of a journey map, it's a way of organizing insights for the purpose of shared understanding and action. If your map achieves shared understanding and action, it kind of doesn't matter what it looks like. So in this case, after this workshop, people in various roles across the org were aligned. They were in agreement on here are the most important things we need to do. That impacted product roadmaps, and boom, we were like, okay, let's go execute. So we were done. So another best practice for customizing your map is to align with how people work and to create the map in a tool that they can easily access so they can easily use this map. So this is, again, this is one phase of a map with many phases. This was created by Mitchell Gould, who's a consultant to Southern California Edison, and he did this in Google Slides. He chose Google Slides to make it easy for people to access, to share it, to update it, and to continually use it in the way that they work. It's just the way that team works. If he had created this in Figma, he could have made it look a whole lot better. However, it would have been hidden in a tool that only designers know how to use, and maybe only the designers have access to. So it's not pretty, it's not fancy, but it was high impact. The people, leadership and the people that were intended to use this map really liked this much simpler version, and they thought it was like a nice deviation from the more beautiful maps they'd had in the past that they found harder to read. Harder to use. So there's no one right answer to which tool you should use. It just depends. So you go back to your planning brief, that first step where you get focused. Who's your map for? How is it going to be used? How do they work? And let that influence the solution that you choose. And again, the solution may be more than one, because you may end up with more than one version of your map. One of my clients recently asked me to create a journey map for them in Mural. In one of our previous engagements, we made a really gorgeous illustration for them. It felt like a museum piece. People loved it, but it was hard to operationalize that map. So this time I was working in partnership with an illustrator named Creighton Berman, fabulous journey map illustrator. And he did these illustrations, and we created this map in Mural. And that was a trade-off. So we traded off the beauty of the final deliverable for something that was optimized for workshops. And each of these illustration panels that you see at the top could actually stand on its own as like a PowerPoint slide. And we actually ended up making a one-pager that summarized the entire journey. Again, because this company wanted something that made it very easy for them to use this map in workshops, but they also wanted things they could very easily drop into PowerPoints, because that's how they work. So as you customize your map, you want to align it to the culture and the needs of the company. And there is absolutely a time and a place for gorgeous maps. I just heard a sigh of relief from the illustrators that I know who are on this call. And in fact, the person that I partner with on this journey map is here on this call as well, Nick Beaumast, who's joining us 4 a.m. in New Zealand. He's an amazing UX researcher and journey mapper, and we've partnered a lot for the last decade. So this is like journey map meets infographic. And why? Well, we chose this approach because of the audience, because of the objective of this map, and because of the culture in the company. This map was intended to be a single source of truth. It was intended to ground people in the problem space and be something that we could use to inform innovation for a couple of years, because it was really based on sort of those fundamental needs that don't change. How well we're doing changes, but people's needs were not going to change much over the next couple of years. So this hung in a major thoroughfare, and 2 years after we hung it there, people were still engaging with this map, finding my name, reaching out to me with questions, saying, oh my God, how do I get a copy of this? So in this case, high production value made sense. It signaled this is something the org cares about and you should care about it too. Here's another example, again, partnership with Nick Bomast, another map that was intended to be a single source of truth, long lasting. This client had us actually create 11 by 17 poster versions of this that were front and back, which they placed on every single chair in their cafeteria because they wanted everybody to have easy access to this map for reference. And so again, this is that illustrative approach that Nick Bomas is so well known for. He does these gorgeous illustrations, but this has a little bit more of that grid approach compared to this last one, which is much more infographic-y. So part of customizing your map is figuring out what data to include and how much. And whoo, do I struggle with this. I'm like super detailed Virgo. I like to put everything I know in a journey map, and it don't do what I do. Do what I say, not what I do. So as Mark McCormick says, you need to know your internal customers and speak their language. It's almost a Myers-Briggs personality type question. Some leaders can only sense through quantitative data because for them, numbers equal facts. Percy Rose of HP Customer Experience, by the way, he's another former presenter here at UX Pressure. That's actually how I met him. He says, because of that, we need to include competitive data. And he says, nothing gets execs on the edge of their seats like competitive data. And by the way, check out Percy's session and the associated blog post. He's phenomenal. Okay, here's how Percy includes that competitive lens in his journey maps. And by the way, any journey map example I include here is deliberately blurry. Sorry for that. Journey maps always include sensitive data, and my clients would never allow me to share journey maps that actually showed you real data. So I apologize, but that's just the way it is. So what is this map? Percy works for HP Enterprise. This map is a current state map focused on retention. So biggest opportunities to address retention. And you can see here at the top, this map focuses on 2 personas. Below that, you see there are 7 phases and steps within each one of these phases. In the center of the map, you see those 2 emotional trend lines. There's one for each persona. And those emotional trend lines include a description of the experience and a label for the associated feeling. Things that are up in that green positive territory are working well. Orange signifies things that are hurting HP the most. And the very bottom swim lane here shows you how Percy and his team have incorporated that quant survey data, showing how HP is doing relative to the competition. Percy also prioritizes including KPIs in the map. This is very common, especially when a company has a robust CX function. So why does Percy include KPIs? Because they resonate with key stakeholders. And he says, if you're not including KPIs, you're not going to improve anything. The KPIs show what you're going to improve at the end of the day. And again, I think this has a lot to do with the maturity of journey mapping in the organization. If you have a mature CX function in your org, you're far more likely to have aligned on what are the KPIs. If your company or your client is newer to journey mapping, it's less likely that you figure these things out, but that could be a North Star. All right, so what does it look like for Percy when he includes KPIs? So same map. Here at the top, he's got KPIs. The up arrows are showing KPIs that are up at or above target metric. The orange down arrows are showing the ones that are below. And this inclusion of KPIs is just a really great example of map customization. It may not make sense for you to do this, and that's okay. You need to customize the map based on the audience, the objective, and the culture of your company or your client. Okay, big shock. The collaboration ducks are back. Customization is another phase where you're going to have way more impact if you do this collaboratively. Why is that? As Leanne Waldall says, I knew her when she was at Dropbox, but now she's at ADP. She says, it's like teaching your kids to eat. If they help cook it, they're far more likely to eat it. If you're a parent, I'm sure this totally resonates with you. So you want to include collaborators in decisions about creating the map. So what tool are we going to use? Are we going to use a tool like UX Pressure, Google Slides, Mural, Figma? Yes, and we're going to need more than one. Should you invest money hiring an illustrator? Do we want to create something gorgeous that's going to hang on the wall for a while? What data do we want to include? Because, whoa, there's a lot of insights we could shove into this map. Which things are most important? And because you're trying potentially to meet so many different objectives for so many different audiences, you may end up with multiple versions of your map. So earlier somebody was saying, figuring out which personas to include. Percy in that map I just showed you includes both personas in his map. Maybe you need 2 different versions of your map. Maybe you want to put both personas in one map because otherwise it becomes a logistical nightmare to keep them updated. These are all things that you need to figure out collaboratively. All right, let's jump into the fourth principle, which is integration. And here we're going to do a deep dive because this is so important. So the highest impact maps are integrated into existing processes and tools so that they actually get used. So for maximum impact, you really can't just deliver a map, hang it on the wall, and think that your work is done. You need to launch your maps really thoughtfully. Surprise, surprise, collaboratively. If you've been collaborating up to this point, from the very beginning, getting focused, getting aligned, what are we going to map, why, doing your research, bringing people along on that journey, what kind of map are we going to create? You have laid the groundwork for this map to be accepted, and people have had a lot of time to think about how they can use this journey map to benefit their own work. Sometimes, again, it's incredibly simple things that can be high impact, and this next best practice is one of those. This is like so obvious, you're like, why didn't I think about that? So you want to orient people to the map. You don't want to stick people in front of a giant journey map cold, because if you do, they're going to get overwhelmed and they're going to be like, someday there's going to be a rainy day where I'm going to have time to read all these words. And they're never going to do it, right? Because who's got time to do that? So don't wait for the rainy day. Introduce people to a map in a way that makes them feel comfortable and gives them a sense of the treats that lie within that map for them. So you need to plan an experience to make it less overwhelming for people to look. So remember this super simple Google Slides map? This is, again, is only one phase. If you were to see this entire map, you can understand there's a whole bunch of words here, and it's not very pretty. And so it's not something you really are that excited about jumping into. It's a lot of detail. So what Mitchell does is something very simple. He just reveals one step at a time. I was like, this is like, duh. Oh my God, yes. So this has changed how I present these types of maps. So here you've got a phase with a yellow box around it, phase on the journey, step in the journey. And then over in the right, Mitch has just replicated exactly that content. He's just laid it out from left to right, so it's a little bit easier to read. With this super simple approach, Mitch and his team are guiding the viewer through this map, keeping everybody's eyeballs and brains one step at a time. And then when they're done, people are like, oh, you understand how that map is organized? There's some really juicy, helpful stuff in there. Now I want to engage with this. And they've got their bearings. Another best practice, use videos to introduce your journey maps. So I often do this with Nick Beaumast. We're huge fans of creating video highlights. In this case, I was working with illustrator Creighton Berman. And by the way, I'm happy to share all these names with you later if you want to hire workshop creators, illustrators, video editors, you just let me know. This video editor was a guy named Adam Jeremiah. And we decided, the client asked us to create a video overview that they could use either as a standalone or as part of a workshop, again, just to help people kind of get their bearings and understand, like, what is this journey map? And I really loved this video that we created. It included animations of those cute little illustrations, and it also included voiceovers and then excerpts from real customer interviews. So another thing that Nick and I generally do when we partner is we create a deck. And so the map is not enough on its own. We actually have a deck that accompanies that map. And sometimes, and that deck will stand on its own. So when you have a map that's a single source of truth, it includes a lot of information. And so Nick and I just plan a presentation where we introduce the map. So we ground people in the problem space. We help them understand, here are the steps people are going through in their journeys. Here are the most important pain points. Again, often we're using video. And after we've walked people through that presentation and giving them their bearings, then we do the, ta-da, here's the map, grand reveal. Often we're going straight into a workshop. So speaking of workshops, workshops are really hard these days. So I kind of gotten to a point where I was like, yay, workshops are going well, because they were all in person. And workshops are also easy if they're 100% remote. So during COVID, it was like, okay, I can do this. But now, where you've got like half your audience with you in person and half of them are on Zoom, it's like, oh my God, this is really challenging. So Amelia Astrom is on this call. She is an amazing workshop designer, and she really changed my workshop game. So I highly encourage you to hire a workshop designer to help you figure out how to navigate this new landscape we're all working in. So what do we do in our workshops? And again, this is pointing to a lot of the work that Nick Beaumast and I do together. So we generally begin by prioritizing pain points, because often journey maps have a lot of pain points in them. My favorite way to do this is by dot voting. We're either using stickers or built-in voting functions and tools like Miro. I might ask people to map those points onto a 2x2. And speaking of workshops, I haven't personally gotten to use it yet, but I understand that UX Pressure has built-in workshop functionality, so you might want to check that out. Another thing that Nick and I generally do in our workshops is to put those insights from the map into action. So we go beyond brainstorming. People get frustrated when they go to yet another workshop where all they do is brainstorm ideas, and then everybody goes straight back to the way they typically work. So coming out of a workshop with just brainstormed ideas is not enough. So we will try to help people develop those ideas into concepts. So how do we do that? We actually give people worksheets that they complete. And those worksheets include things like, here's my idea, here's the pain point it addresses, here's how it's going to benefit the business or the KPI I think it's going to impact, and so forth. You're at risk of people coming out of that workshop fired up. We had so many ideas. And again, they go right back to the regular way of working and nothing changes. So one thing that you can do is assign ownership. So each one of those concepts that comes out of that workshop has a person who owns it, and they have mandate from leadership to carry it forward. So you got to make sure from the very beginning of the process, again, when you're planning your journey mapping, you are getting buy-in from leadership. And if you've got buy-in from leadership, they are vested in this map and in this workshop, the ideas that are being generated, and you're going to have their backing that people are going to own these ideas and carry them forward. One idea that I love, this comes from Jim Callback, is to take the ideas that are generated in those workshops directly into research. So imagine you do a journey mapping workshop on a Friday, people brainstorm a bunch of ideas, they develop those into concepts. Maybe those concepts are just words. Maybe there's illustrations of those concepts, or wireframes, or even low fidelity prototypes. And you know that a week later, you're going straight into a research session. And again, that helps make sure that these ideas that come out of your workshop are not going to fizzle. And then there's operationalizing the maps. So work with leadership to make sure that there are established processes around how people use these maps. So remember this map from Percy Rose of HP. This is his strategic map, and it focuses on, sorry, I just noticed Amelia's cat walking by her webcam. Sorry for getting distracted. Okay, this map from Percy Rose. He refers to this current state map as the strategic map. It focuses on the customer's point of view. This is just the first step. The second is the process map. This is like, and so what? So what are we going to do about it? This one outlines an action plan for each team per phase to move the needle on a KPI. So this action map, action plan, includes a lot of the same components as that main strategic map. So you've got the phases here at the top, you got the KPIs, and then the whole rest of this page is dedicated to per team. Those are the numbers on the left. What does this team need to do to move the needle on each one of these KPIs? So this is basically a work stream. Like they are articulating from leadership, you need to go do this because we are moving the needle on this KPI. If you can tie the pain points that you identified in your journey map to specific work streams like this, you can move the needle on those KPIs. Maybe there's established processes where quarterly or twice a year you get back together and have updates on where are we in this work stream and how have we moved the needle on this KPI, then you've done it. That's the kind of impact that we're looking for from journey mapping. So this was a taste of what I teach. Maps with impact need to be focused, data-based, customized, integrated, and all of this needs to be done collaboratively. And if you'd like to go deeper with more examples, more case studies, more blurry example maps, more best practices, you have a couple of options. So one is to take my course on Udemy Academy. That's about a 1.5 hour course, so about 3 times more than you got today. You can sign up on Maven to be informed for my next week-long workshop. Those workshops are 12 hours spread over a week. I teach them on Zoom. I'm not sure exactly when I'm teaching next. You can contact me for a private training for your team. And of course, we can connect on LinkedIn. I occasionally post articles about journey mapping on LinkedIn. And if you have a question for me that we don't get to today, and we're unlikely to because I realized I went over time, I will answer your questions there as well. And in fact, Veronica and Yulia's plan is that we're going to compile all those questions and I will either respond to everybody in writing or I will record a video, but you will all have access to those answers. And I have a party favor for you. So as Veronica already mentioned, UX Pressure team is going to send each of you a digital copy of this poster, which summarizes all of these principles and these best practices. And this poster was created by a journey mapper named Sarah Lawrence, who I do a lot of work with. If you would like a hard copy of this poster, I do have those, and I'm happy to mail you one. You would just need to reach out to me on LinkedIn. And with that, that's a wrap. We've got 1 minute for questions. So I'm going to hand the mic back over to Veronica.
Yes, thank you, Julie. That was amazing. I was listening to you and reading all the chat that was, well, in the chat. That was fantastic. Thank you so much. And as you say, actually, we have 1 minute for one question.
Yeah, sorry, y'all.
That's okay. You already did my job and promised people that they will get the answers to their questions a little bit later, so I'm fine. But before we move to that one question, I would like to mention that if you want to check all the great features for customer journey mapping collaboration in UX Pressure that Julie mentioned through her speech, feel free to book a call with our team via the link in the chat. And the question that I want to ask you is, just let me check, was from Emilia. The teams I'm working with are often busy and don't think they have time for journey mapping workshops. How can I make the process more efficient?
Oof. Boy, that's a good question. I think that's sort of another reason to get leadership buy-in. And so often what I do in my workshops is I ensure that the invitation for the workshop comes from a very senior leader in the company. And that's whether it's, me at Meta or whether it's a client that I'm working with. So Nick Beaumast and I just did this. We were like, no, we don't want the UX researcher to send the invitation. We want it to come from the head of product, right? That really matters. And if you've got that senior stakeholder or leader involved from the very beginning, they're going to set the tone for what's expected. If you can also invite them to the workshop to kind of kick things off and say, here's what the team's going to do today, and I'm going to come back in 3 hours because I want to hear a presentation of the concepts y'all came up with. That kind of signals to people how important it is. So I personally find if I don't have a senior leader involved, people are like, oh my God, I'm so busy, I'm not showing up to that workshop. But if they know somebody very senior is going to be there, they will show up and they will participate. Great question, Amelia.